Greetings of peace and solidarity among the faithful of the United States. I am Andrés from the Student Christian Movement of the Philippines, and I will be discussing the human rights situation in our country, particularly with the terror law. So, in our country, state terrorism and state violence has continuously threatened the lives and the livelihood of the most ordinary Filipinos. We actually experienced a US-backed dictatorship under Ferdinand Marcos during the 70s and the 80s. Under martial law, many were killed, detained, tortured, or forced into disappearance. The fall of the Marcos dictatorship did not mean the fall of state-sponsored violence. Extrajudicial killings and other forms of human rights violations are characterized among succeeding presidents. Counterinsurgency programs have been continuously guided by the CIA and funded by the US government. However, intensified state fascism is being experienced and being worsened under the current administration of Duterte. He started his term by implementing a murderous drug war that has killed more than 30,000, mostly urban poor. They were not given the chance to rehabilitate and seek justice. Policemen have been the obvious culprit of these killings. He also implemented martial law in Mindanao, which has resulted in the worsening of human rights of ordinary workers and farmers. He is also implementing an all-out war policy, which has resulted in killings among the unarmed and innocent in our country under the guise of cracking down communist revolutionaries in the Philippines. Of course, the worst manifestation in the legislative arena of a de facto martial law in the Philippines is the Antiterrorism Act of 2020, or more commonly known as the terror law. So, the terror law is a grave violation of the Philippine Constitution that grants equal protection of laws and is against arbitrary searches and seizures in our country. The Constitution also guarantees that there shall be no torture, secret detention, and other forms of unjust detention. And the Constitution guarantees that the innocent shall be presumed until proven guilty. And also under our Constitution, no person shall be detained solely by the reason of his or her political beliefs and aspirations. So the terror law poses a grave threat to these fundamental rights of the Filipino people. The Duterte administration took advantage of the pandemic of Filipino people being locked in their houses in order to pass many anti-people laws, which include the terror law. And this law seeks to water down and model the legal definition of terrorism. Anyone can be labeled as a terrorist and charged with committing or planning an act of terrorism based on mere suspicion by state elements. As a whole, the terror law is dangerous, repressive, and unconstitutional. It can be it is being used as a tool of repression and to crack down against dissent, especially those who are expressing legitimate concerns because of the worsening economic crisis, because of the crackdown and lockdown in our country. Particularly the implementing rules and regulation of the terror law worsens the human rights situation in our country. It is being used as a tool of repression with the establishment of an Antiterrorism Council. There is an unbridled abuse through the vague use of definitions pertaining to terrorism. It operates on the presumption of guilt and eliminates the need for a trial. It infringes on fundamental rights enshrined in the Philippine laws and constitution. So the Antiterrorism Council is a quasi-judicial council under the executive branch of the government. It gives great judicial powers to the executive branch. And under this Anti-Terror Council, the executive branch now has the power to designate individuals and organizations as terrorists. Most of those composing the Antiterrorism Council are known generals from the police and the military who have a track record of human rights violations even before the current administration. More importantly, we have to take into consideration the bloody human rights record under President Rodrigo Duterte, where more than 277 farmers have been killed, 30,000 have been killed under the drug war. There's a rampant killing of government critics and other innocent persons. There have been so many illegal arrests and filing of trumped-up charges against those who are expressing dissent and opposition. And there's indiscriminate red tagging and terror tagging, where the government can easily tag individuals, organizations, and other personalities as communists. And so many church people, so many church organizations have experienced this kind of repression also. So under the terror law, the Antiterrorism Council under the executive branch can brand anyone of being a terrorist. Terror tagging has been used in our Philippines to silence dissent. Under the terror law, the definition of terrorism involves both the act and the intent and has been left intentionally vague. It gives the Anti-Terrorism Council free rein to abuse its power and to intimidate the critics of the government. Worse, suspected terrorists can be arrested without a warrant. The terror law in our country also presumes guilty of individuals and organizations, and it violates due process. Individuals and organizations carry the burden of proving their innocence. Once arrested, individuals can be detained for as long as 30 days, not including weekends and holidays, without being charged. And this violates the chance to post bail. This also violates the right to privacy, as the law allows surveillance of communication and wiretapping without court orders. Organizations branded as terrorists will have their assets frozen and considered as means for funding terrorist activities. Before the terror law, a religious group has been targeted by the government, the Rural Missionaries of the Philippines, a group of nuns and other religious people who are living with farmers and integrating with the struggles. The government interpreted their missionary act as terrorism, as communist activities, and since 2019, their bank accounts have been frozen by the government. So, how will the terror law affect the rights of ordinary Filipinos? Since the implementation of the terror law last July, there has been rapid deterioration of human rights. The anti-terror law legitimizes human rights violations. It stifles dissent and limits the right of Filipinos to freely associate and organize. And it infringes on academic freedom, freedom of expression, and press freedom. So many activists and so many ordinary people have been killed since the implementation of the terror law in our country. Of course, for those in the government, they will benefit from the terror law. They will benefit because this will stifle the capacity for legitimate demands and legitimate dissent. Cronies of the Duterte administration, the landlord, and big businesses will also benefit from the terror law because workers, peasants, and ordinary Filipinos who are most incentivized to forward their demands under worsening economic crisis can be branded as terrorists looking to sabotage the country's economy and national security. The terror law will also worsen the power of the fascist ruling clique of the Duterte administration to attack the opposition and progressive, especially that there is an upcoming elections next year. So of course, in our country, we hope, no, we mobilize Filipinos, we arouse them so that we will not cower in fear. In the midst of ever worsening repression, Filipinos have no course but to resist and fight back. So, what has been the student Christian movement of the Philippines been doing before and during the implementation of the terror law in our country? So, of course, the student Christian movement of the Philippines mobilizes online and off ground to make people aware of the terror law and its effects on the ordinary Filipinos. We formally launched our Human Rights Caravan last December 10, International Human Rights Day, with a forum with numerous personalities and numerous representatives from basic sectors and other sectors in our country that are being targeted by the terror law. Throughout our webinars, we also do social media rallies in which we express our opinions, we express our calls to junk terror law and to encourage more uh, young Christians in our country to stand for human rights and to express their dissent against the worsening human rights situation in our country. We encourage our fellow Christian youth to use their talents, to use their skills, to express their condemnation, to express their worries because of the worsening human rights situation and the worsening economic crisis in our country because of the lockdown in our country. We also participate among many on-ground activities, including the blessings of church people for those lawyers who will battle in the Supreme Court against the terror law. We also participated in candlelighting protests among monuments here in the Philippines, giving prayers and giving worship services for those who are victims of state fascism in our country. Of course, we participated in the growing offline and on-ground mobilizations to express warm bodies against the terror law and other forms of human rights violations in our country, using protests and other forms of creative dissent. We also participated in press conferences in junking terror law together with, in solidarity with basic sectors and other students here in our country. Of course, as Christians, it is very important for us to integrate with the experiences and the struggles of the basic masses, of the workers and the peasants in the Philippines who are the main victims of human rights violations in our country. As we go into the communities, as we go into the urban poor, we link their issues of poverty, of uh, lack of basic services to the terror law. Because here in our country, as people are more incentivized to voice out their demands, to voice out their needs and legitimate concerns, the government chooses to implement fascist and violent policies instead of addressing the demands of the ordinary Filipino people. That is why we encourage Filipinos to realize that there is no recourse but to fight back and to stand against economic and political crisis here in the Philippines. We have also launched many biblical theological reflections where we linked our faith, or we encourage Filipinos that it is the imperative of their faith to go out to um, to experience the hardships of the masses and to be more resolute in fighting against human rights violations in our country. Despite the limitations of pandemic and other uh, situations here in our country, Surin Christian Movement of the Philippines also go into numerous dioceses and numerous church offices in our country in order to expand our efforts and to forge partnerships and to reach more Christian youth in order to arouse, organize, and mobilize them in fighting the terror law and to uphold human rights in our countries. We have also encouraged other student Christian movements from around the globe and other youth solidarity movements and other progressive individuals outside the Philippines to stand against terror law, to uphold human rights in the Philippines, and to have flourishing international solidarity among nations and oppressed peoples in our country. So, as Christian youth, why are we fighting against terror law? Why are we demanding human rights in our country? Particularly here in the Philippines, we are remembering the 500 years of Christianity in our country, but we want to reflect on it in a sense that we are not glorifying colonialism or the attacks of colonial authorities against ordinary Filipinos, in which religion was used as a tool to justify colonialism. Instead, we are encouraging Filipinos to embrace their faith in a more liberative aspect, to use it against tyranny, to use it against state terrorism in our country. Among our integrations, among our interactions with the basic masses in our country, we hope that the Christian youth in our country realize that Christ was born as a poor person. He was a worker. He was part of the basic masses. It means that our God has an ultimate bias towards the oppressed, ultimate bias towards the working class, because God Himself chose to be a part of the working class and experience their tribulations and hopes. And for the Filipino people today, the masses clamor for human rights, the masses clamor to uh, to be against state terrorism in our country, to uphold our economic demands, and to express legitimate struggles. That is why, as Filipino Christian youth, our faith compels us to preach the good news that there is hope and there is struggle, especially among the basic masses. We are called to become fishers of men, to organize the Christian youth, and to make them realize the liberative aspect of our faith. And we are called to carry the cross of the oppressed in order to junk the terror law in our country, uphold human rights, and forward economic demands, and towards a life that is just and full. We exert every effort towards the attainment of peace and mutual edification of the people, of the oppressed people in the Philippines, crying out for liberation and solidarity. Thank you very much.